All right, good afternoon. How are we doing, Allen Memorial Art Museum? Woo! Thank you for the vibe check in the back, John. All right, so with that introduction, thank you. It's been a pleasure working with you at the museum as well, Emily. Shout out to our academic program curators. All right, there's a lot to look forward to in this talk. We're going to tell you about the structure, about the process, about the artifacts, the lessons learned, something for everyone in the crowd. All right, I'm so glad to see lots of familiar faces as well. Okay, let's get to it. Notice how the cover page is actually this gallery. In fact, in this spot, we'll see, and it's a little bit concealed by my title text, but there's also table of games, there are people, there are faculty. It's a good, let's see. All right, so how is this talk structured? I'm gonna do our due diligence of signposting. We're gonna set the scene. What's the state of the world, state of museums, state of games. Talk a bit about the process. If you, like me, are a research methodology nerd or teacher, hopefully this will be of a lot of interest to you. If not, you'll have the games to look forward to. This is where we'll bring student, teaching assistant extraordinaire. Lessons learned, so you can learn from my collective successes and failures with this course. And future work and takeaways. What's cooking in the lab? What can you look forward to in the future? Okay, just want to double check with my crew. Are captions working okay? Audio, all of that stuff before I proceed. Thank you so much. Thumbs up. There we go. Okay, state of the world. Let's set the scene. So, museums as cultural institutions, right? People go to great lengths to create opportunities for the community to engage with the art, right? Shout out to our curators, shout out to the people who collaborate with them, to the visitors, right? Games have also captured the world, right, as a successful form of entertainment. You may recognize this as the SCO, right, our disco. And we have an event called Professor Beers and Soda. And to the computer science edition of this event, I brought the word association board game called Codenames, right? And this was a great way to get people, professors and students, talking. I think Mary Hogan is actually in the audience. We had a team Mary, team Emily, professor student team competition. Mary won by 1 point, and I was very upset, but it was a good way to get us all in the room and build community, right? Or perhaps like me, you grew up with a Game Boy Advance, played a lot of Pokemon, wanted to catch them all, fill out your Pokedex, explore the world, build the best team, all of that stuff. And so really thinking about how everyone here is really interested in engagement and connection and stories, right? Museum games do exist, right? This is not a completely new thing that started at Oberlin, but as described by the curators I was working with, a lot of times the status quo here is that museum games are some variation on a scavenger hunt, right? Like come to the museum, we'll give you a worksheet, perhaps some prompts around a theme, right? And then go ahead and search for the information or search for the specific detail. And while this is a valid way to do the museum, especially if the theme is of interest to you, I want to invite us to expand the possibilities here. There's a lot of different game genres out there. There are a lot of different ways we can design for play. And this is not meant to be a criticism on the museum professionals, right? Especially for those who are not trained as game designers. And so what happens when you take people who are trained as game designers and trained museum professionals and put them together? That really sets the stage for this research question. How might museum games expand the possibilities for play and museum engagement? And notice how this is a bi-directional research question, right? There's two sides of the coin here. Can games be built with and for museums? And can a museum be fun? Right. I tried to make this talk accessible to the public. If you want to talk shop, talk about theory, the literature, things like that, I invite you to do that after. I want to focus on the experience, the products, insights, all of that. Okay, let's talk about that collaboration. I like to think of myself as a bridge builder between disciplines. And so here we are building bridges between museum and game worlds, right? One way this is happening is through the different relationships, which Emily French already foreshadowed, right? Cross-stakeholder collaboration. Look at this very enthusiastically taken 1.5x selfie. But here we go with Oscar Davenport, Don Haleb, my teaching assistants and former students in the course, me as the faculty here, and Emily French as the curator, who worked with us most closely last semester. We're also working across disciplines, right? Across museum studies, human-computer interaction, and game design. There's the museum, and there's one of the logos for the computer science department. And so let's start thinking about this from those different perspectives and where we might find some intersections. What do game designers want? One of the questions at the heart of game design, right, is how do we create games that people want to play? Let's invite players to immerse themselves in the game world and story. Let's do something classic, or let's subvert a trope that already exists, right? And I want to show you just one tiny example of a game that is that I'm fond of called Crypt of the Necrodancer, which is often a rhythm game and a roguelike game. You're going to move to the beat of the music as you try to slay a dragon that's also going to dance in a specific pattern. So you're trying to figure out what combo of moves do I need to try and defeat this beast. This is a fun game, and it's not at all like real life. That's the point, right? So what do museums and specifically the Allen's curators that were working with me want, right? And they had a lot of really open interactional goals, right? Look closely, wonder about the objects, and connect with others, right? Notice how it's not a homework assignment. Notice how there isn't a specific set of facts or information that we need to force upon the game, but that this really is a lot more about engagement and interaction, right? So let's start trying to scooch these different worlds together, right? How could they relate? We can start scratching the surface, and then Donha will also show you a lot of different ways students went for the weird and interpreted this prompt. We can think about artwork as character, right? Take this one of the paintings from the contemporary art collection, turn it into a pixel art sprite, which now you can move around, jump, right? Put things together. Very exciting, very exciting. You're now embodying the art through the game world. You can also think of the museum as a game world itself. Maybe there's an alternate universe where you get blipped into the museum and now you have to escape, or you have to slay enemies or something else, right? Museum game world. Shout out to my computer science and studio art double major mentee, Amanda Raven, who created the pixel art for this slide. And games really break the mold of what should happen in a museum, right? No longer are we chained to the norms of let's walk around at a distance and just very politely, silently stare at the art, which is fine. That's a valid way to look at it, but we really want to go for the weird here and mix things up. So through this introduction, through this scene setting, I want to start to show you and give you evidence throughout the talk. Playfulness in games are a generative basis for design innovation. The design process in itself and the resulting games will expand the possibilities for engagement, right? Whether you think about this from the student designer's perspective, where, doing this project made me think about the museum differently, right? Or if you're a player who's playing the games, it's like, oh, I hadn't thought about the art in that way, right? These are all different ways that we can start to reimagine, change the narrative of what happens. Okay, process. Any other teachers in the room? Yes? Okay, great. This is especially for you, but if not, I hope everyone takes something away from this talk. So I'm starting to talk about cross-stakeholder collaboration a couple different times in this talk, and how this really is a relationship between professors, students, and curators. I was hired for my expertise in human-computer interaction and computer science, right? And so that also involves teaching and research. And so being able to take human-centered design in my training and bridge it with what's happening in computer science major is one of my career goals. We can also think about this as one of my career goals is also to start new research areas that are different from what I did in graduate school. And so this collaboration with the Art Museum is one way for me to circle that square. Great. The students come in really wanting to make games. I kid you not, people will come to my office hours and say, game design is the reason I majored in computer science. And I'm like, wow, tall order. All right, let's go. But also really wanting a software project for portfolios. Whether students go into game design or not, being able to have a big project that they had creative ownership over, took direction on, collaborated, built a thing over time, that is what makes you competitive for opportunities after Oberlin. Great. Emily French already talked about this in her beautiful intro, but thinking about how does this contribute to the existing relationship between the college and the museum, right? I'm really fortunate that we're not starting from zero here. The museum has already started working with all the different departments on campus, right? Like really kudos to you all for being able to translate to not only humanists, but also STEM folks like me as well, right? And then learning new ways to engage with visitors. Really loved all the mutual learning that was happening with all of us in the room. Okay. And this is starting to look a little bit more like professional collaborations outside the classroom, right? Oftentimes you're hired or you're brought into a team because you have expertise that the folks on the team don't already have. And so what happens with that complement, right? Okay. So just want to mention, we don't have time to go through the entire game design curriculum, but just want to show how many creative and research processes, it's very iterative, right? We're going from planning, proofs of concepts, prototypes, figuring it out, testing it, revising it, lots of revision, lots of feedback and things like that. And the way this looked like in fall of last semester was it was the majority of the semester. After 2 to 3 weeks of, getting set up with different game design tools and programming, we spent 12 weeks on this museum game jam project, right? In the game design world, a game jam is when we all have a shared prompt and we're encouraged to explore that prompt in whatever way we choose as a team, right? And so you can see in the examples later that different artworks were chosen, different game genres were chosen, all of that's good. And we don't need to get too lost in the weeds here. But again, thinking about brainstorming, character, core mechanics, what makes this game unique, gameplay loop, play test for feedback, the final presentation. This is what happened across those 12 weeks. It actually resembles more the length of an internship than a usual weekly homework assignment. Right. Okay. I'm going to give you a montage, some slice of life, some frames from the storyboard of what happened in the semester. Kickoff mini lecture. We invite the curators to give a talk about, hey, can a museum be fun? What are we doing here? What does the Allen care about? And then also thinking about what are some of the requirements, the must-haves for the museum games, right? It's got to feature the museum artwork or be played in the gallery setting or both. It has to be multiplayer, but other than that, really open. Use whatever game genre you like, use whatever artwork you like, things like that. After we spend some time with that brainstorming, getting proof of concept, we want to put our work in front of other people. Get feedback. Is this game exciting to you? Is it confusing? Is it confusing as the good puzzle solving way, or is it confusing in the, oh, I don't want to play this anymore way? Right. Exchanging feedback with different audiences, more likely that your peers at Oberlin are also gamers or have some games literacy, whereas the museum professionals are going to be more excited about this from the museum angle, right? And so being able to work with different audiences to get feedback is going to make the design stronger. If you have done peer review or gotten feedback from your manager or do any other sort of exchange in that way in your practice, this is similar to that. We also have a lot of designer curator coordination. What does it take to bring games into the gallery, right? Don't worry about the details of this spreadsheet, just wanted to show how this was the coordination artifact that my students and I prepared so Emily French could interface with the dozens of employees you have to coordinate with to make sure that furniture is where it needs to be, the timing's good, word gets out about the event, all of that stuff. And so being able to have enough time and opportunities to practice both the methodology from the player's side as well as the logistics needed for the museum, right? Something I will say is that the first semester we did this, we were extremely careful. We were like, okay, we need to make sure that everything's planned to the T, things don't break, things like that. And then over time, as people got more of a sense of what we were trying to do here, what the risks and what the precautions were, as well as the benefits, we were able to get more and more happening in the galleries. All right, speaking of happening in the galleries, you may have heard of the Museum Arcade event, right? Or the final playtest, right? Where you really get to celebrate the variety of designs. Donha made this poster for last semester called the Museum Arcade. And then this was where we set up pop-up furniture. Everyone brought the final prototype of their game. People from the public, friends, colleagues could all come and play the games and celebrate what was made over those 12 weeks. Right. Staff as well, as you can see. But yes, this really is what is the magic of being a designer, right? Designing products that will live in the world, right? And invite a new interaction that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Next, final presentations and web pages. Part of the professional development in this course was talking about speaking skills, being able to show your process and product. We had speaking center and teaching assistant workshops in the class, and also the students this most recent semester prepared web pages about their games where you can play a sample of the game as well as hear a little bit about its backstory and origins. It's very exciting. Okay, that was the montage. If you're curious about any of the pedagogical choices or other things I mentioned here, I'm happy to talk shop after. But now I want to invite to the stage teaching assistant and former student, Don Hale, to tell us a little bit more about the games that emerged. Let's welcome her.
Okay. Hey everyone, my name is Dan Ha, and I am a fourth-year computer science and politics student. And in Professor Emily's lab, my research interests are accessible and inclusive computing education. I'm very fortunate to have participated in the course as a student and a member of the teaching team. And I've made and played a variety of museum games over the last semester. And before introducing Major Theme to you, and without having you watch me speedrun the entire game catalog, I would like to walk you through two variables that I think these games could be loosely described by. The first one is who is doing the task of looking closely, and the second one is to what extent does the game require players to wonder about the artifact? And based on these variables, I've identified three major themes that arise from museum games. Please note that these also include board games, so not just video games, and they are not exhaustive or mutually exclusive categories. So the first one that I would like to introduce you to are games that bring museum artifacts outside of their original context. So think games that take things such as these lovely artifacts right here and turn them into game assets that interact with each other in completely different ways. An example is reimagining museum artifacts as platform fighters. For those of you who don't know, because I certainly didn't know, platform fighter is a subgenre of fighting games where characters try to deplete each other's health bar or knock each other off of platforms. And it's very chaotic, very fun. It's very fast paced. And a group of students who were avid fans of this category was like, what if you take artworks or artifacts such as the prodigal son and artifacts such as the temple bell and turn them into fighters, as well as like it's a very interesting sonic-based weapon that has high damage and proportionately long reload time. And so that's exactly what they made. Additionally, they also took artwork such as Try a Little Tenderness, as you see right there, and turned that into a platform arena. So these three completely different artworks were battling each other inside Try a Little Tenderness, and it was really fun. And in this theme, the work of looking closely and curating new interaction is done by the student curators or designers. And while the players are not required to wonder about the museum artifacts as they play this game, they get to experience this entirely new world of interacting with the artifact. And a con of this, or sort of a controversial point this has sparked a little bit of conversation between us, is whether it is appropriate to portray museum artifacts in these ways, especially when its historical and cultural context are not told alongside the characters fighting. This is unfortunately the trade-off when the intention of the designer is to create like entirely new experiences, which is not wrong, but it's something that we should consider. The next theme that I would like to introduce are games that reimagine interactions with museum artifacts within their original context. So this is a long way of saying these artifacts are still artifacts. They're not like turned into fighters, but the innovation lies in how museum goers can interact with them and each other. So now that it's getting a lot warmer, I can definitely feel the love in the air again. And this group of students was like, artifacts exist in museum spaces. All they do is stare at each other. They can get pretty lonely. So what if we had a Tinder, but for museum artifacts? Tinder is a dating website or platform. And many of you may be familiar with this game already, Painter, where players create dating profiles for museum artifacts. And the fun of this is the players have the choice to look at the physical or outward appearance of an artwork and create, like okay profiles for the artifact, or they can dig really deep into the history and create like really fun ones. And it's a competitive game, so whoever makes the best profile wins. So as you can see here, the student designers provide the framework, and this time it's the players who are tasked with looking closely. The design of these games encourage, but do not require players to not just look at the artifact for what it is, but also consult other information sources to create more interesting interactions. And the intention of the designer is to redesign the museum goers with the museum artifacts as artifact themselves. And in fact, the scavenger hunt game falls within this category, and our game designers from fall 2023 tried really hard to take this up a few notches. The last theme is games that incorporate museum artifacts' original context into gameplay. And to make it simple, the most stark difference between this theme and the others is that certain information about the artifact is intentionally designed into the story, so the players are required to engage with like a deeper aspect of the artifact. For example, Escape the Allen is a puzzle/adventure game where players are locked inside of the Allen and they have to escape before midnight. if I'm not wrong. And throughout this journey, the bocho, which is an artifact at the Allen Museum, plays a very important role in the game storyline and motivation for why they need to escape the Allen. During the entire process of development, the student team, with a special shout out to computer science and studio arts student Erika Flores, was very meticulous and reflective on whether their interpretation of the bocho is appropriate and respectful. And in games like Escape the Allen, looking closely can be done by both the students and the designer. Student designers, in doing this work, incorporating the artifact into gameplay, needs to delve deeper into the history of each artifact to create new relevant relationships, whereas players who engage in the storylines are sort of required or co-opted into learning about an aspect of the artifact that's beyond just pure aesthetics. However, these games may run the risk of being prescriptive with what kind of narrative is communicated. And yeah, it's an ongoing conversation. And what we've learned from this is that design can determine how and to what extent the designer and player can engage with the artwork. And striking the balance between the two and like finding out what is the best way to move forward is always a cross-stakeholder conversation.
So I want you to learn from my successes and failures. Lessons learned. All right, we're gonna have some stuff here for educators, but so fellow teachers, scholars, as well as everyone, museum goers and gamers. So first lesson for educators is part of this cross-stakeholder collaboration, how and when to involve your stakeholders outside of class. Here it was really important that we met before the semester started, or before at least the Museum Game Jam project started, to co-write the design brief, make sure we knew what the scope of the assignment was. And within that, professors in the audience, do you try to figure out at least most of your course schedule before the semester starts? Agree? I see some nods. Okay, great. So when you're also doing that, thinking about what are some good times for intermediate deadlines and milestones, and when your stakeholders can come into class, right? And this is going to be better than trying to do a lot of one-off meetings outside of class time, right? Calendars are hard, and so we already have the dedicated class time, have them come to the class period. Okay, great. This is also an opportunity for the curators to rehearse the gallery logistics, right? We had a couple dress rehearsals where we would set up all the furniture, go the whole 9 yards, right? In order to make sure that we had enough furniture, timekeeping was good, things felt comfy before we invited, you know, like 50 additional people into the space. Time for iteration and feedback and tuning things before the end of semester show. All right. Next, managing expectations is a really important part of this. I'm really grateful to my department for giving me the opportunity to teach this class 3 semesters in a row. It meant that I had the opportunity to make revisions in between and improve based on the experience that I had acquired. And one of the way that this mattered the most in game design was talking about how this is a professional experience collaborating with your peers, right, as an independent game design company, and with the client, right, outside of computer science, outside of games. And this is not just games for gamers' sake. The class that I designed and taught here is very different from the game design and development classes I took when I was a student, right, where it was more along the lines of let's recreate Tetris and platformers and figure out how to work with lots of different kinds of hardware and graphics, right? That's important and good. And students did touch upon that in my class. But this is really an untraditional game design class, right? Bespoke to Oberlin with the art museum collaboration and the liberal arts training. And so being able to describe this in the course description, advising, drop period would be really important because it's not everyone's cup of tea. And that's okay, right? But being able to know what you're signing up for so students don't come in with this expectation. It's like, why didn't you have lectures on this? And it's like, well, because as a 3rd or 4th year computer science major, that's something I expected you to do on your own. And then where we're going to spend time in class is doing the professional design collaboration part. Right? So being able to be upfront about what's going to happen is really important. Okay, next lesson for educators is to talk about product life cycles. With all the times I've been saying the phrase cross-stakeholder collaboration, hopefully then it's a pretty easy connection to how museum games are co-created by students, faculty, and curators. And so what happens during and after the semester to these products? This is now operating a little bit outside the framework of you turn in a homework assignment to me and I give you a grade, right? And so this is once again, a professional development and teaching opportunity. Please talk about entrepreneurship and licenses, things like copyright, Creative Commons within the class, right? And these are things that lots of resources exist outside. I was able to most clearly do this in the last semester, so in fall 24, where we had a conversation around, hey, what does it look like for the museum and I to use and or modify your games for future nonprofit educational use, right? Do you plan to keep working on this game after the semester ends, right? Thinking about things like that. And that's definitely more of an ongoing conversation. I don't want to claim that I figured out how to convey or handle this, but it's something that my lab and I are actually drafting materials and resources for right now so folks can be better equipped in the future. Okay, and then finally, a call for everyone in this room, for gamers and museum goers, an invitation to rethink museum experiences, right? Playfulness is possible in this space. Games are not only for stereotypical gamers, right? Let's expand the possibilities and interrupt these narratives that we have in a lot of society, right? Okay. The next time you come into a game, whether or not you have one of the games that we've created or you're coming in with a playful intention, maybe you're really into birds and hats. And so you're like, okay, I'm gonna, figure out who, if the person coming with me also is really into at least one of those things, we can have a bit of a banter about, the headgear of the art in the gallery. Who knows? Go crazy. All right. So future work and takeaways. This is not the end, thankfully, for museum game research and development. Just want to give you, watch the space, stay tuned. We'll have more events. But right now we're in an exciting stage where after having done this for 3 semesters, I get to do a bit more of the sharing broadly outside of the classroom, right? So whether it's academic publications and human-computer interaction or public-facing scholarship, like what we're doing here, sharing this work with the public, is really exciting. Playful events at the museum. We're in the process of checking in with some of the student teams, saying like, hey, we'd be really interested in using this for the shared art program or other events on the museum's calendar. Let's talk about what that would look like, what the next steps are. How much do you want to be involved, especially for folks who've already graduated, right? Like what's a reasonable ask? It's going to depend on their situation and what they're interested in doing. We also have some expansions into new projects or deeper cuts into the lab. Shout out to Oscar Davenport, who's working on interactive installations. How might we take, sensors and special effects and physical computing and put them in the museum space for this playful context. Amanda Rabin is also one of my students still exploring pixelization as a technique for museum game art. She just submitted an application to the Oberlin Summer Research Fellowship, so fingers crossed it gets accepted. We did a lot of drafting and revision and all of that stuff. We'll see. But anyway, she's already been doing some great stuff with thinking about this from both the computer science and studio art perspective. What does it take to take one of the paintings from the Allen and turn it into a video game character? Right? What are some of the design choices you can make, right, for the visual, the audio, the mechanical that's happening from the gallery into this digital game world? So that's really exciting. I'm really psyched for her to have an opportunity to do a systematic study of this. Okay. Some takeaways, what I want you to leave the room with. In this presentation and over the past 3 semesters, we were exploring the value of playful design in museums, reimagining games with museum values guiding that innovation, bridging curators, computer science faculty, and students, and teaching human-centered design techniques alongside system building. And so with all of that, I once again invite you to look closely, wonder about the object, and connect with others.